Book of Ecclesiastes is a lot like the book of Micah in that we like to quote from one bit of it. And the reason that we only quote from one bit of it is because these words are inspiring, cause us to meditate, or are interesting, whereas the rest of the book, or the books, are actually quite dark and difficult and even disturbing at times. Ecclesiastes 3 and the book of Ecclesiastes as a whole is about disillusionment and awe. Now, we were just in Florida this week, and I went to the Kennedy Space Center with my dad and my sisters and my children. Those old days of the space shuttle, those old days, like that was so long ago, the days of the shuttle still fascinate. And of all the many things that astonish about the whole business of going to space and back, to me is this idea that the space shuttle used to travel at 17,500 miles an hour and needed to come through re-entry and slow down enough and perform a number of S-turns in order to continue to slow itself down so that it would descend at a degree, about 19 degrees, and at about 2,000 feet, the nose would come up and it would continue to slow down so that it would hit the runway in Florida at somewhere between 212 and 228 miles an hour. Outside of that range is an enormous problem. And someone somewhere was able to compute that math. That to me is mind-blowing. For someone who struggled greatly in statistics 101 in college, that kind of math is awesome. We use that word way too much. I'm just as guilty as anyone else. Oh, you had a bagel for breakfast. That's awesome. No. There is a lot of awe-inducing things in the world. Bagels for breakfast are probably not one of those things, but the space shuttle landing on a runway in Florida is one of those things. On the other side, it is easy pickings to go on for a while about why you might be disillusioned, if we're talking about an equation of awe and disillusionment. After yesterday's events in Istanbul, again, why, when humans can engage in space travel, they can't seem to figure out hunger and violence is a mystery, but it is also a sermon that we've all heard before. The writer of Ecclesiastes doesn't simply throw hands up at the holding of things in tension, awe on the one hand and disillusionment on the other, but instead invites the reader into a sense of mindfulness over the work, the toil of the hearer, as busy as we might believe ourselves to be in this day and age. There is a theology of work that is being advanced here in Ecclesiastes rather than just a wistfulness over things coming and going. Yes, the writer acknowledges things do come and go. And indeed, there is always a season for disillusionment and awe. And in fact, that season is now. It is today, this hour, or perhaps even this minute. There is nothing new under the sun. But we are all made to work. We all need to toil. Leisure has no purpose without work. But to what kind of work are we called? Joseph and Mary, of course, in the second chapter of Matthew, are engaged in a particular kind of work. The story in Matthew's telling rushes from genealogy to the birth of the Christ child to the Magi coming and Herod interfering, and suddenly the family is encouraged to run. They run because Scripture demanded that Jesus comes out of Egypt as the new Moses, and Herod will appear as the new Pharaoh. They run because of Herod's paranoia, his thin skin, his misinformed or misshaped sense of self. They run because God provides Joseph with wisdom and foresight. They run like many families run these days, just in the nick of time. They run because home is meaningless without the people who make home home. Matthew's telling of the story does, in fact, speak to an imbalance in the responsibilities of the parent. The lineage of the genealogy in Matthew's telling of the story comes through Joseph, even as Matthew asserts that Joseph is not Jesus' biological father. And the angel comes to Joseph specifically in Matthew's telling. It's Joseph that gathers up the family, and it is Joseph that is promised to return to the land of Israel by the angel. Now, there are many commentaries available in this day and age that seek to redress this imbalance by telling the story from Mary's perspective, and I can understand why. Indeed, Luke's gospel does just that. And in modern times, we are necessarily interested in speaking about the critical vocation of both parents who have power, engage in vulnerability, and all of the other roles involved with parenting. But as important as that is, it is also vital that we acknowledge Joseph's role in all of this. First of all, to connect his actions to the theological proclamation that Jesus is not his biological son. Indeed, the gospel, the good news to the world at this time of year, is an affirmation of responsibility and care and tenderness for family, biological or not, family in all its forms. Joseph, of course, does not, in Matthew's telling, ever wander or waver if he's supposed to be involved at this stage of the game with danger lurking. I was just with my good friend Kim down in Florida, who has 2 sons adopted from South Korea, and I noticed, I'm not used to this, so I noticed the stares of people walking by and listened in on a couple of very disjointed conversations that tried to get at how a white woman ended up with 2 Asian sons. But what are we to say in light of Joseph? In what way shall this man toil? What are his gifts? Joseph is a quiet figure in the New Testament, yet he's there in his actions and teaching and counsel. Do we really think that Jesus came to know Torah as well as he did without Joseph's guidance? Do we really think Jesus became an artful, creative, intelligent storyteller without Joseph's wisdom? Do we really believe that Jesus came to be interested in the politics and upheaval of his community without Joseph's dinner time talks? Can we really imagine Jesus becoming a teacher of ethics and wisdom if Joseph were not ethical or wise? Joseph's modeling is a quiet modeling, in sharp contrast to how fatherhood, or more importantly, manhood, is often presented in our day and age. The ultimate fighting championship is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry that is legal in every state, while at the same time, dog fighting isn't just banned, but is a felony in every state. You tell me the difference, and we'll have a chat about shades of gray. But the UFC is a favorite of mine to denigrate, and to be frank, it is a simple enough target. I could now pivot back to disillusionment we may have about manhood or fatherhood in our age, but I won't. Because the list goes on, and you already know what that list says. Indeed, it would also be very easy to try and pivot then toward awe, to tell you a story of a refugee father, or draw from my own experience to offer a story that is an anomaly that teaches us a quieter or more wise version of masculinity. But that is also not where our lives are lived much of the time. Instead, I turn to Joan Chittister, who tells us this story. The disciple once asked, "Where shall I look for enlightenment?" The wise one replied, "Here." "When will it happen?" the disciple asked. "It's happening right now," the wise one answered. "Then why am I not experiencing it?" "Because you don't look." "What should I look for?" "Nothing. Just look." "Look at what?" "At anything your eyes light upon." "But must I look in a special way?" "No, the ordinary way will do." "But don't I always look the ordinary way?" "No, you don't." "Why ever not?" "Because to look, you must be here, and you are mostly somewhere else." That is actually part of my reasoning for why something like the UFC has enormous popular traction in our day and age. It is because some of us really are pining for another time when life was perhaps somewhat simpler for some of us, or it was a little clearer for some of us, and we could evaluate success on bruises and black eyes, or by the size of our biceps, or another metric that's easy to see and understand. And Chichita's story doesn't mean that we can't engage in leisure and rest and escape from time to time, but rather we believe we are busier than we are because we work when we are not at work, and we do not work when we are there. We do not fully attend to people and places, forever missing the flowers by the side of the road and the color of people's eyes and the stunning complexities of the trees. Like I said, we just returned from Florida, where we went to the Kennedy Space Center, and we went on an airboat, and we took a stroll on the beach, and we drove go-karts. But as my children age, it is my hope, more than remembering times like that they will reflect on a dinner table of storytelling, a dinner table where politics was discussed and religion was gently, sometimes animatedly, debated. There was some gentle teasing, and there was a reflection on not just what's happening out there, but what we are doing about it. And all the while, a presence, perhaps a quiet presence, my hope is, will abide. That my children, our grandchildren, our friends might see that we weren't leading our families or our circles in a vacuum, but we were merely imitating the ethics of Jesus taught to him by his non-biological father, who knew when to run and when to listen, when to guide and when to return home. The ethics of Jesus taught to him by a man that knew that he didn't know everything and knew that he needed to listen. That his might, his muscle, his integrity, his value was bound up in his willingness to care for his child and for his spouse and to listen to the wisdom of God. Men of Union Kong, may it be so for us. May we measure our success by our willingness to listen, to gently guide, and to engage in the ethics of a servant. May God's peace be with you.